great news. You're ready for wellness care. Your x-rays have improved. We've got a cervical curve back in your neck, yada, yada, yada. And by the way, your monthly payment's going from 400 down to 200. Meaning, and you smile,
Frictionless.
right? And you agree, right? It's easy, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens with patients, that instead of presenting them a new program with a new decision to make, instead of doing that, we're now giving them the good clinical news along with the good financial news that their payment's going down. And that subtle little psychological change skyrocketed retention.
Genesis Nation, welcome again. Super excited to have with us Dr. Miles Bodzin. If you have not heard of this gentleman, he may be the guy hiding behind a larger brand, Cash Practice. So if you hadn't heard of Cash Practice, I don't know if you've been going to any shows or taking a look at what's going on, because you are influential in the field. Your company, your people, we work hand in hand. Genesis is integrated with Cash Practice. And for those of us up front who may not know, it is way more than just merchant services, meaning like it's not just another credit card processing company. My experience with Cash Practice has really led me to understand how you help practices grow through things like retention and organization and, the management of the relationship as well. So you have a really powerful company and a really powerful software. I'm excited to have you share this with us.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for having me. And yes, we've been working with Genesis for, it feels like forever. And it's always a pleasure to be with family. And thank you for having me, and looking forward to sharing. And yes, I like to be hidden behind the scenes. That's, let the company do the work, and I'm there to support it and share the story. But ultimately, people aren't here to hear me. They're here to learn from the company. So but thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing with everybody.
Yeah. So, can you give us a little bit of your history of like how you went from, chiropractor to Cash Practice? Like, how did that evolve?
So that story, we all have our origin stories. And for me, my origin story starts with I dropped out of engineering school to become a chiropractor. I was, without going into great detail, I was lost as a young kid, not realizing I was studying engineering, and realized, it's not really what I want to do in my life, is be an engineer, but I enjoyed the work. And I went on a mission to figure out what I wanted out of life, and chiropractic fell in my lap. When I read this chiropractic story of that the subluxation and the nervous system and all of that stuff really excited me, I decided to become a chiropractor, and I was called to serve as a chiropractor, and did that for about 20 years, practiced. And in practice, like a lot of doctors who are probably listening right now and CAs, I myself ran into some roadblocks in practice. We all could benefit from some good coaching. I didn't have the benefit of someone telling me to get a coach. And Brian, I don't know if you know many engineers, but people who come from engineering backgrounds, we have kind of a handicap in that we think we can solve all problems ourselves. That's a common it's a common problem we face. And I see it with other fellow engineers where, come on, just get some advice from someone else. And I didn't do that. So I ran into some roadblocks, and eventually learned to figure some things out. And some of the things I learned that helped me was someone taught me to do care plans, and someone taught me to go ahead and do, how to sell care and how to get prepays and all that kind of stuff. And I started having some great success in practice. Until I ran to a scenario, and docs, if you've been doing prepays, you've probably run into it yourself, where I had 1 week where I had 3 families that were in the military who had prepaid me suddenly have something happen where they got transferred out of town. And I'm guessing you could think where this is going to go, is that I had to do a bunch of refunds.
Yeah, I was going to say that the accounting nightmare, which your engineering brain may have enjoyed, but I know I don't have an engineering brain, so I've like going through that. I've been there. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of writing about $10,000 of refunds that week, and it dawned on me, like, even though I was having some success, I was like, oh, this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. There's got to be a better way. And not only that, I was also struggling with something else. And Brian, you probably can potentially relate to this. And that is, we've all had patients who we know they got the big idea of chiropractic. We know, we could see it in their eyes. We witnessed it. They got the big idea. But what drove me crazy is we've had those patients who got the big idea and still dropped out of care.
Yeah.
Right. We've all had those people. And then what really baffled my mind is I had plenty of patients who never got the big idea for whatever reason. And they were with me for years. And I was like, something's amiss here, because I was taught in school that if we educated our patients and they got the knowledge of chiropractic, and if they knew what I knew, they would do what I do. Like, they would follow me to the ends of the earth. And that was what was taught, but that's not what I was observing. And I was really kind of dumbfounded by that I'm spending all this time teaching the principles, getting people on care plans, doing doing all these things, and yet I still was kind of bumping my head on a glass ceiling. And it was at that time that I had a conversation with a friend of mine who shared with me the concept of having people put on monthly payments. And they shared that idea with me. And I said, well, that's an interesting idea. I never thought of that. And we started doing that. And lo and behold, wow, we started growing and growing and growing and growing to the point where we grew tremendously. Now, how did that translate into cash practice? Well, put on my engineering hat and I'm saying, we're doing all this stuff with care plans and monthly payments, all this, and there's no software out at that time to make that job easy. So I started writing software just for myself to make this repetitive task of creating custom care plans.
You wrote the software yourself?
Yeah, I wrote it myself. I've been doing software since I was in high school. So I started writing some software to begin with.
That's a good side
To
hobby.
solve my own problems,
yeah, well,
right?
yeah, it's amazing. I love it.
And this is in the early 2000s when you couldn't, like, go on the internet today and you Google something, you'll find someone who's created something because there's a bajillion programs out there. But this is early 2000s where the internet was this new thing. And so I started writing some software for myself. And that turned into friends of mine asking, hey, Miles, what are you doing? And, talking in conversations before you know it, they want to use it. Yeah. And then just kind of as a lark, this is in like maybe around the year 2000 or something around there, that I said, there's this new company out there. There's this new thing that I'm addicted to called eBay. And I was buying shit on eBay. I was buying cars and all this kind of fun stuff. And I said, I should sell something on eBay. What can I sell? And I decided to start selling some of my software at that time on eBay. And it caught fire. It was like what you would say something went viral today. Well, it kind of did that back then, where I did a bunch of sales and I was like, wow, this is cool. I'm making some good money.
I'm onto something.
But more importantly, just like you're interviewing me right now, I interviewed a number of the doctors who had bought the software shortly after. And the feedback I was getting was, this is the best thing, since sliced bread. Like, I'm signing people up for care. I'm doing prepays. I'm doing monthly payments. Like, this is amazing, right? I'm making all this money. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So light bulb turns on, like, all right, well, we have something here that we could help other chiropractors. And that's where this all began. And it didn't start with payment processing. It started with building out care plans. And then we also started doing email marketing, which is something, I remember collecting email addresses from patients back in the day when people didn't even know what email was, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there was these early days of doing this stuff. And it's just the principles of what we identified that grew a practice. They're true today as they were, just like chiropractic. The principles don't change. The principles of growing the practice are the same. It's just creating software that makes the execution of those principles really easy and streamlined.
But I was going to say, the beauty of this all is taking your experience, your mind, blending those together and turning these principles into software and technology. True leveraging of, and it's not like, oh, I'm getting this software and it's making me do more work. You're using the software and it's actually helping yourself and staff members, especially people that are delivering care plans and closing financials, makes their job so much easier. So what are those principles, if you would not mind sharing?
Yeah, I'll be happy to share. So, in my practice, I turned it into a laboratory. And what I mean by that is I literally started interviewing patients. I said, I got to learn what drives our patients' behavior so that the ones who are educated are getting care, not dropping out. And so the ones that are not educated, I'm curious, why are they still coming? Like, I'm just really curious. That's my curious mind. So I started interviewing patients on camera. And here's what I learned through all those interviews. I learned 5 key things, 4 of which is are the things that we do. The 5 principles we learned, we'll refer to the first 4 as the 4 F's, and I call them, it's an easy way to remember them. So we have these 4 principles. One of them we call, we already talked about, 4 F's. We talk about these care plans. That's what we refer to as forecasting care. That this principle is that people need to know the future. People need to know what they're getting involved in. They need to know their financial responsibilities, their time commitments. We've all talked about, people talk about, they're committing their time and their money, right? Time and money. It's always about time and money. Well, that's what we're talking about. It gives patients comfort to know what their time commitments and their financial commitments are in advance.
It actually gives them a sense of safety and trust.
100%. You nailed it. It gives them safety.
Which is like, that's rooted in the nervous system. Awesome. Okay, so forecasting is first F, yes.
Next one is frictionless payments. So we talk about payment processing, right? That's and that is a key component. But as I shared with you, I was doing these prepay plans in the past, like a lot of us were taught to do, and they're great and all. Don't get me wrong; it's great to enroll someone, and it's a big win. You get that. But what I identified was the challenge with prepay programs is two things. Number one is prepaying is not the normal thing most people do when they make big purchases. It's not normal behavior it's not typical behavior of the community that you're serving out in the population. So in essence, and whenever you try to get people to do something they don't normally do, like people don't normally walk onto a car lot and write a check for the full price of the car. Most people are putting on a monthly payment.
Yeah.
So I've learned through this interviewing process that whenever you're trying to get people to do something they don't normally do, you have to learn how to sell them. So this is where we all get caught up and I got to learn how to sell and close a deal. And the challenge with that is you have the risk of creating this emotion called buyer's remorse. So what we learned is, okay, that it can be done and there's plenty of doctors doing it successfully, but the challenge becomes on the back end. So Brian, if on the back end, meaning the end of care, and I want to transition them now to a lifetime practice member, and if that's the goal in your practice, is that people on lifetime wellness care and a maintenance patient, and they're just part of the practice, prepay programs sabotage that experience. That we've seen routinely in practice of doing lots of prepays, the area that they generally lose most patients is at the re-sign point, where the transition to wellness is.
It's almost like they experience exhaustion. They're like, oh, I'm done. No more. I've experienced that myself. And that's like, I love that you're diving into the psychology here.
What you're experiencing, what you're expressing there is that we've kind of pinned that down to is it's a big financial decision for people, that the more decisions patients have to make, the more opportunities there are for them to leave the practice. And the bigger the decision, the more challenging it is for them to continue. So imagine this, patient's gone through 6, 8, 12 months of care. They're feeling great. They're well. And now you're telling them they have a new program they have to now purchase or buy. Yes. So it becomes a roadblock. It's just a major hurdle. So we identified, okay, well, how do we solve that? And this is where, when my friend shared with me the idea of doing monthly payments, I didn't know this at the time, but our observation after doing this for a number of years is we no longer ran into that roadblock. So Brian, if you were my patient and you have been paying me $300-400 a month, let's just say for the last year, and it's time to go to wellness care, literally you've paid me $400 just a few weeks ago, right? It's a routine part of your life now. It's part of your monthly budget in your household. And now I get to say to you, Brian, great news. You're ready for wellness care. Your x-rays have improved. We've got a cervical curve back in your neck, yada, yada, yada. And by the way, your monthly payment's going from 400 down to 200, meaning, and you smile, right? And you agree, right? It's easy, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what happens with patients, that instead of presenting them a new program with a new decision to make, instead of doing that, we're now giving them the good clinical news along with the good financial news that their payment's going down. And that subtle little psychological change skyrocketed retention. And so that's an example of where frictionless payments come in, the idea, the principle behind it. The principle is you want to make payment processing as invisible as possible. So this is why we want it to be on their credit card or their bank account as an auto debit. We don't want to ask the patient to make a physical payment in the office. We don't want to send them a bill in the mail or an invoice that they have to pay. We don't want to put them on care credit that they send them a bill in the mail. Like, I don't want anything reminding my patient of money over and over and over and over. I want to make it where it kind of falls into the background. So with Cash Practice, our auto debit system, it's designed specifically with that in mind. It's designed purposely to remove the thought of money from the patient's mind on a recurring basis. And we often say the principle is the more frequent a patient thinks about paying for care, or the more frequent a patient thinks about the money, the lower the retention. It's an inverse proportion, that higher thoughts, it's not the money that the problem is, it's the repetitive thought of the money. So that's the principle behind it. So everything we do from a payment system is like, we'll get doctors who come to us and say, well, I was taught by my coach that, if I'm doing a year of care, to get the payments, if I'm going to do monthly payments, get them to pay it off in 3 months. And I'm like, well, why? What's the point of that? They go, well, I want to get paid. I don't want to, I want to get paid. I'm like, well, what happens in the next 7 months when they're not paying you and you want to transition to wellness? You've gone 7 months without collecting money. They're not in the habit of it. How do you transition them to wellness? And they run into the same stumbling block. So the business model is always make sure your monthly payments are in sync with the months of treatment. If it's 6 months of care, 6 months of payments, 8 months of care, eight
Love it.
months of payments, etc.
And it's very apparent that this model works because every company is following this model
Genesis is following this
today.
model. Cash Practice is
Look,
following. Like every
and I'm
software
saying
company is doing this, right?
outside of our industry, like I'm thinking, Netflix, Spotify, you name it, you keep going and going, and like all these, and it's, obviously from a business perspective, it's a recurring revenue model, but you're taking that model into your own practice as well. And
100%.
it's a
Yeah.
brilliant model, and there's a lot of psychology tied to it, not just what kind of factor it can increase the sale of your business. It's more so like how it creates a frictionless experience for the patient themselves.
100%. I'll often ask doctors, how many of you have your cell phone bill on automatic payment? You have your credit card on file with the cell phone company, and they're automatically having, and everybody, yeah, I automatically, I say, well, the reason cell phone companies do that, it's not because they want to make it easier for you, although that is a benefit, and it is easier for them, it is a benefit, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is because when you automate the payment, it's not top of mind awareness. And because it's not top of mind awareness, you're not shopping your bill for a better deal. You're not looking for, oh, wait, oh my God, I didn't realize I'm paying that much. Let me go look at AT&T, or let me go look at Verizon. You're not shopping it. So it's a retention model. It is a booster of retention. And that's what we observe with our doctors, is that when they do our care plans, and I want to go back to the care plans for a second. Docs, if you're doing care plans on your own, a spreadsheet, you made up your own thing, you're doing your thing, your buddy down the street does, I'm 99% of the time what we see being done out there is not compliant and legal. Even though you think it's mathematically right, or you think you've got, it's not, because there's so many things that go involved. And from the standpoint of the terms that are in there, the federal government now has the rule of the Patient No Surprises Act that requires you to have the proper language for your good faith estimate. And I don't want to scare a bunch of people. I'm just simply saying you want to look at what you're doing and make sure it's proper.
Well, if
Or
I
better
could
yet,
bottom
just
line,
work with us.
well, yeah, I was going to say, I want to bottom line that piece that you guys take compliance and state by state regulations into account when you're onboarding your clients. I want to keep us
100%,
on,
100%.
on track here, because that's a huge component as well. What's the
Yes.
third F?
So the third F is feedback. And not just feedback, but feedback that's intuitive. Meaning us chiropractors, we're good at giving our patients feedback. Generally, most chiropractors, your progress exams, you do your exam findings, you explain things, and etc. The challenge is that for most patients, they don't understand what we do to the same degree we do. And sometimes we forget that. I mean, I still remember, I don't know if you remember, Brian, the first time you were in school and they showed you x-rays and you're looking at them and you're like, am I looking at a weather map? Like, you don't know what you're looking at when you first see it the first time, because you're not, it's not something you're familiar with, right? Yeah. So we expect our patients, you got to keep that in mind, that we go over our scores and the different things we do. We think they get it, but they don't really get it. And so my experience has been, you got to have feedback in a way that's intuitive, so they just automatically get it. So this is where the principle being is that people just need to understand it in a way that they can then take it home and explain it to their spouse, or take it home and explain it to their girlfriend, or be able to just look at it and know what it means. It's sort of like when people wear a smartwatch. They know intuitively, oh, it's telling me it's buzzing to go get me off my butt to go do more steps, right? It's intuitive, right? It's automatic. There's no explanation required.
Are you referring to a feedback that the actual technology or system gives the doctor, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it gives so here's what I'm referring to. So we have a module that we created. Let me back up for a second. What we found works really well to communicate progress when you have exams being done, right? That's what we're doing, examining patient. Well, we said, where else do people get feedback from exams? And that's in school. We get report cards. People know what letter grades mean. I don't have to teach anybody what an A, a B, a C, a D means. So what we designed was a program called the Wellness Score, is what we call it, where doctors put in their exam findings. Cervical curve angle, posture.
I love this feature. I've seen it. I've got to see it. So docs, if I can give you my doctor's perspective, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't get it at first. Now I know. That immediate feedback to the patient is like, oh, my wellness score is a C. How do I get it to an A? And you've color coordinated. You've color coordinated with those grades that are already programmed into everyone's brain in America, because we all know the grading system, A, B, C, D, F.
And F.
There's no E's, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want an F in our wellness score.
Yeah. And the idea is to translate what we do in doctor language into layman's language in a
Yes.
way that people just get it. And it's sort of like why in martial arts do they use different color belts, right? It's just to show you where it's giving feedback where people are. So
Yeah.
the grading system, and here's the thing I'll say is we're not in the business as as cash practice to tell our doctors what they should be measuring. We stay out of the clinical side of things, meaning whatever technique you're using, if you're a doctor who's doing structural correction like CVP, we know you're looking for curve corrections and those kind of things. Another doctor who's doing more functional type stuff, they may be measuring different things.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you get 10 chiropractors in a room, we're going to probably get 100 different opinions as to what we need to do, right? So the idea here is our software is designed so that you could plug in. We have like 120, 130 different things you can measure. And you could pick and choose the things you want to measure to put into this report. So you choose the things you want to measure. We're not telling you to buy this piece of equipment or anything. There's great stuff out there. There's a lot of
Yeah.
great tools out there, and you plug the results of those tools into our system, and you get this kind of summary report of, hey, you got to we've measured these 10 things, and based upon the ratings of all those, we've determined your health is a D- or a D+. And it does change the conversation, Brian, that when doctors are using this, one of the most common things they report to us is that they observe in a report of findings. It sort of changes the conversation from, hey, doc, what do you have to do to get rid of my neck pain, to, doc, what do we have to do to get my C to an A? Like it takes it
I love
away
it.
from the symptom
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's beautiful.
it really helps in the progress exams where, I'm sure you've seen this, where doctors kind of struggle with at a progress exam, like the patient's feeling better. What am I telling them? They're questioning their need for further care, and how am I, their scans
And
aren't
I
changing. And
love the objectivity that this provides, because it's, they've probably heard enough, in my experience, like the patient has heard enough of me telling the same story, like, yes, lifetime chiropractic care, and they're just not listening anymore. But this removes the doc or the CA from that and creates an objective score, a wellness score. Love
absolutely.
it.
And what you're referring to right there, there's some psychology behind that anytime you use a third party to kind of support your point of view, it bolsters that point of view. It's why we use testimonials, right? It's why when our front desk CA is at the front desk and they say, well, I need you to make up a visit, it's not my opinion, it's the office policy, right? The office policy is the third party that they use as the reinforcement to their recommendation. And this is the same thing for a doctor. Listen, hey, patient, I wish I could wave a magic wand over your head and you were better, but the documentation, the reporting shows you're not well yet, right?
Yeah.
It's your third party. So again, when we get back to the principles, that's one of those principles we like to use is
Love it.
whenever
So,
you have
so
a
far,
third
yeah, I got
party.
it. We got forecasting, frictionless payment, feedback.
The last
Um,
one is the one that most most of them are already good at, and that's frequent contact. It's often what we refer to as the patient education side of things, but it's more than patient education. It's you having your name and brand in front of people on a regular basis. Now, back when I was still in practice, we didn't have social media and all this stuff, so it was like getting in, you newsletters and emails and all this stuff. Nowadays, it's lots of ways. There's emails, newsletters, there's social media, there's posters in your office, there's text messaging, there's all these things you could have that you can do. And in cash practice, we developed an email-based system. It's one thing you do in your library of things you do for frequent contact, for educating your patients and keeping your name in front of them. And one of the things I've been teaching doctors that we came to learn, we didn't know this initially because but we came to learn this, is that it's not as important as we think it is for people to actually open the emails and read them. We want them reading, of course. We want them educated. We want them to see that stuff, and we want them to do it. But what we found, there's a psychological component as well, and that is you just being in their inbox, whether they open it or not. That when they get up in the morning and scroll through their phone, they see your
your
practice
name.
name or your name.
Yeah.
And so
That's
that's the other principle is frequent contact. So it's really basic. Not basic.
love it.
But doctors know this
Well,
already. Most doctors
it's
are
simple, not easy, because it takes a commitment and organizing and scheduling and making sure, like, marketing is all about consistency and recognizing when it
100%.
becomes fatigued or too much noise. So you said there was one more outside of the four
Yeah, the
F's.
one that's outside of it, and I say it's outside of it because we don't have I say it's not when we talk about a lot because we don't have a system in a cash practice that does this. Although this principle or this idea is kind of weaved into all of this stuff. And that is when I interviewed patients and I was learning from them, the most common word used among all the patients, like you listen to the interviews, you go like, oh, they said that, and they said that, and they said that. The word convenience came up over and over and over. That one of the things we identified was, wow, this is very interesting, that when someone's in pain and they're a new patient and they're hurting and they come in to see us, they will tolerate inconveniences at the practice. They'll tolerate missing work. They'll tolerate, if they're waiting for 20 minutes to see the doctor, they'll tolerate if the way the payments work are kind of wonky, whatever it is, they'll tolerate it because they're hurting and they want to, get feeling better. But once people are feeling better and they're kind of in their routine, they will not deal with inconvenience. They will not. That if you have things going on in your practice that create inconveniences, it will sabotage your retention tremendously. And the analogy I'll use is, Brian, if you owned, outside of everything you're doing, you owned a bar and it was kicking ass. Like it was a good bar and you're making good money and it was great service. And you hired me as a consultant to come in and say, Miles, I heard you can help with bars and come look at my bar. And I do. And I come observe you on Friday night and I look at things, or maybe one of the evenings, and I go, you know what? It's amazing. You got great service, great drinks. Everything's fast. Everything's humming. But I see two things I want you to change, Brian. One is tonight, when the bar opens, I want you, before the bar opens, have someone go to the store and I want them to buy a bunch of salty peanuts and salty nuts and salty pretzels. And I want little bowls of salty food put all over the place. Let's do that and see what happens. And you do that subtle little change. And I ask you Saturday morning, what happened last night? And you tell me, shit, sales were up 15%. Why is that? Because we influence the behavior of your patrons by putting some salty food out, and that caused them to drink some more. I said, that's amazing. That's great. That's awesome. Next thing I want you to do tonight, Saturday night, before they come in, have someone come in this afternoon. And I noticed at the bar, one thing I observed is people were getting their drinks and it was fast, but they were leaving the bar. They weren't hanging out there. What I want you to do is at the bar, under the counter where the stools are, I want you to put some little hooks so people can hang their bags. And nowadays, even put in USB ports, right, for people's phone chargers, right? So I ask you Sunday morning, what happened? And you say, well, people were hanging out more and our sales went up another 5%. And I go, great. So here's what we didn't do. I didn't have you change anything about your product, your service. I didn't suggest you to educate your clients on the benefits of drinking alcohol. Like, all I did was I changed a couple little things that influenced your patient's behavior. And I'm telling you, in our practices, it's no different. There are things that we do that influence our patient's behavior. And all of these principles I'm sharing you are basically those. These are things that will influence your patient's behavior to either stay with us or to leave us. And
it's been statistically proven that patients will leave an office regardless of the level of care because of a lack of digital experience. So, and what does digital and technology create is convenience.
Exactly, 100%. And so I always give this kind of exercise to doctors. I say, here, do a team meeting and ask your team, let's identify, everybody just spitball. Let's write them all down. Anything you think we're doing in our practice that's inconvenient to the patient. And I'm telling you, that's a sabotager to the practice. And you go and remove those things, and lo and behold, retention starts to improve. And so that's the fifth one, is convenience. And convenience it's tied into your email marketing platform. It's tied into giving objective feedback. It's tied into putting people on care plans. It's tied into automating payments. So it's weaved into those things. But it is a principle that I don't want to ignore, because it is a crucial one when it comes to patient retention. And that's our gig. Our gig is, there's plenty of companies out there teaching doctors here's the new shiny object to get new patients. And doctors love that stuff. Like, we want to get new patients. But I think our addiction to new patients is a reflection of the fact that we're not keeping them long enough. Have we had greater retention?
It's like, if we really want to shift the model of what we're attempting to do as chiropractors, we got to leave that quick fix perspective. And
100%.
retention and all the psychology and tools and technology behind it are what's waiting for us to expand this capacity. So
absolutely.
This has been super. I took a ton of notes too, and I've seen.
I saw you writing notes.
I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I got this, because now we know the 4 F's and 1 C. And that is not related to the grades that we're getting. So you got forecasting, frictionless payment, feedback, frequent contact, and convenience. All of these things are available through Cash Practice. And just being around you and seeing what you're doing for the profession, I'm given a great amount of gratitude. I appreciate your journey and the
Thank you.
humility that you expressed, and like, you've learned and then taken that and used all your strengths to create this amazing technology and company. So
Thank you. I
next
appreciate
time you
that.
see Cash Practice out there at a show, definitely go talk to them, because they're way more than merchant processing and credit card processing. And also,
100%. Yeah.
we will have everything listed down below. Contact, way to get a consult and see what kind of fit you can have with Cash Practice and how you can implement all these principles. And thank you so much for your time. This was awesome.
Dr. Brian, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and I really appreciate it.